Most folks in the neighborhood knew me as the quiet guy who kept to himself. I wasn't flashy, and I certainly didn't have the latest toys to show off. My pride and joy was a truck that most people wouldn't look twice at. A faded, dented old pickup from the late 1970s. The paint had long since lost its shine. A couple of spots had rust patches, and the engine let out a growl that sounded half tired, half stubborn. But to me, that truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a legacy. My dad bought it brand new, and over the decades, it had carried lumber, tools, groceries, and countless memories. But not everyone saw it that way. Take Karen, for example. Every neighborhood has one, and ours was no different. She lived across the street in a 2-story house with spotless, white siding and a driveway that sparkled from being pressure-washed every week. Her brand-new SUV gleamed under the sun, and she loved reminding everyone of its features. Heated seats, touchscreens, cameras in every corner. She thrived on appearances, and anything that didn't meet her idea of modern was, in her words, an eyesore. One Saturday morning, I pulled up in front of my place after a run to the hardware store. As I shut the door and grabbed my supplies from the bed of the truck, I heard laughter drift across the street. Karen was standing in her driveway, sipping iced coffee, her sunglasses perched high on her head. Still driving that heap of metal? She called out, her voice dripping with mockery. Honestly, it looks like it belongs in a junkyard. I don't know how it even runs. Her words stung more than I'd admit, but I gave her a polite nod and said, "Runs just fine, thank you." That only made her laugh harder. "Well, if you ever want to upgrade to something respectable, I could recommend a dealership. That thing is embarrassing." I could feel a few of the neighbors glancing over their fences, trying to hide their amusement. Karen's voice had a way of traveling farther than it should. I quietly unloaded the wood planks I'd bought and went inside, pretending not to care. But inside, I was frustrated. People didn't understand what that truck meant. They saw rust, dents, and age. I saw history, loyalty, and craftsmanship that modern vehicles couldn't hold a candle to. Little did Karen know, the truck she mocked was about to draw attention in a way that would silence her laughter, because the police department was planning something that would change how the entire neighborhood looked at my so-called embarrassing truck. The morning after Karen's loud remarks, I went about my day like usual. I tinkered with the truck in my driveway, tightening a few bolts and wiping down the interior. That old leather seat was cracked, but it still felt like home. I wasn't planning on going anywhere fancy, just the farmer's market later. That's when I noticed something unusual. 2 police cruisers slowly rolling down the street. They weren't chasing anyone or patrolling for trouble. No sirens, no flashing lights, just a steady crawl, like they were looking for something specific. At first, I thought maybe there'd been a complaint. Honestly, with Karen across the street, that wouldn't have surprised me. She loved filing little neighborhood concerns, too. Many leaves in someone's yard. Grass half an inch too tall, you name it. I braced myself, expecting the officers to knock on my door. But instead, one of the cruisers slowed right in front of my driveway. An officer leaned out the window, nodded at me, and then, much to my surprise, pointed at my truck. "Hey there! Mind if we take a closer look at that beauty?" he called out. For a moment, I thought he was joking. Beauty? Surely he couldn't mean the faded, rust-speckled pickup. But the officer stepped out, followed by his partner, and they both circled the truck like they were inspecting a classic at a car show. "This is a 78, right?" the first officer asked, brushing his hand across the hood. I blinked. "Yeah, bought brand new by my old man. Been in the family ever since." The second officer's eyes lit up. "These things are tanks! My grandfather had one just like it. Never thought I'd see one in this condition still running. Man, you've kept her alive all these years?" I couldn't help but smile. "Sure have. Runs smoother than you'd expect." Before long, 2 more cruisers showed up, then another. Word must have spread on the radio, because suddenly I had half a lineup of police officers on my street, each one eager to admire the truck. They opened doors gently, asked if they could peek under the hood, and complimented the engine's growl when I started it up for them. Across the street, Karen stood frozen on her driveway, iced coffee clutched in her hand, sunglasses sliding down her nose. She looked like she couldn't decide whether to call the HOA or faint right there on the spot. One officer even said, "You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore. These newer cars, too much plastic and electronics. But this is the real deal." The sound of admiration from the officers filled the block, and for the first time, I wasn't embarrassed about the stares from my neighbors. Karen had mocked my truck as a heap of junk. But now the very people who uphold the law were praising it like it belonged in a museum. What none of us realized yet was that this attention was only the beginning. The police department had bigger plans for my old truck, plans that would shock Karen even more. The lineup of police cars in front of my house caused a bit of a stir. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. Kids rode their bikes a little slower past the driveway. And Karen, well, she pretended, to water her already perfect lawn while straining to hear every word the officers said. One of the senior officers, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a voice that carried authority, stepped forward. He introduced himself as Captain Harris. "Sir," he said with a smile, "I'll be honest with you. We don't usually stop like this, but your truck is something special. Our department is organizing a community parade next weekend to showcase local history and tradition. We'd be honored if you'd drive this classic in the lineup." I was taken aback. "My old truck? In a parade?" "Absolutely," Harris said without hesitation. "It represents resilience, reliability, and a time when things were built to last. We've got vintage police cars rolling out too, but yours would be the highlight. People love seeing vehicles like this. It reminds them of their fathers, grandfathers, and the good old days." I scratched my chin, glancing at the truck. To me, it was just part of daily life. I never thought of it as a showpiece, but the idea of it leading a parade, that was something else. "Well, if you're sure folks want to see it, I'd be glad to bring it along." The officers grinned like kids at Christmas. They took pictures of the truck right there in my driveway, some of them posing beside it. One even said, "Wait till the guys at the station hear about this. Half of them will want to trade in their cruisers." By this point, Karen had dropped the hose on her lawn, letting water spill onto the sidewalk. Her jaw was clenched, her face turning a shade redder by the minute. The same truck she laughed at was now getting photographed and celebrated like it was a celebrity. As the cruisers finally pulled away, promising to be in touch with the parade details, Karen couldn't hold her tongue. She marched across the street in her spotless sneakers, arms folded tightly. "Really?" she snapped. "They're going to put that rust bucket in a parade? Don't you think it's a little humiliating? For the neighborhood, I mean." I smiled politely. "They seem to think it's something to be proud of." Karen scoffed and rolled her eyes. "Well, don't expect me to clap when you drive by. It's ridiculous." But deep down, I could see the frustration eating at her. For once, she wasn't the center of attention, and she hated it. What I didn't know then was that the parade day itself would turn the spotlight even brighter, leaving Karen with no choice but to swallow her pride in front of the whole town. Parade day arrived with a crisp breeze and sunshine that made the whole town glow. I had spent the previous evening giving my truck the closest thing to a makeover it had ever seen. A good wash, a little wax on the chrome, and a polish on the hubcaps. Sure, the dents and rust were still there, but now they gleamed with pride instead of shame. When I pulled into the parade lineup, the police department had already parked their vintage cruisers in a row. Officers in full uniform waved me over, guiding my truck into position right behind the lead car. My old pickup was no longer just part of my driveway. It was now part of the town's celebration. As we waited for the parade to start, a few officers and volunteers came by to shake my hand. "This thing is incredible," one said, snapping a photo. Another added, "You've kept history alive, sir. Respect." Finally, the marching band struck up, and the parade began. I eased my truck forward, the engine's steady rumble echoing down Main Street. Crowds lined both sides of the road, cheering, waving flags, and taking pictures. To my surprise, people pointed excitedly at the truck, nudging each other and smiling like they'd just seen an old friend roll by. "Look at that Chevy," someone shouted. "My dad had one of those when I was a kid," another yelled. Kids waved, older folks clapped with nostalgic smiles, and phones lit up the scene. I wasn't just driving in a parade, I was carrying memories for hundreds of people who remembered when trucks like mine ruled the road. And then I spotted her. Karen. Front row, perfect outfit, camera in hand. But instead of laughing, her expression was a mix of disbelief and forced composure. The crowd around her was cheering so loudly for the truck that she had no choice but to stand there, silent, as her neighbors applauded the very vehicle she'd called embarrassing. The best part? Captain Harris leaned out of his cruiser ahead of me and shouted over the band, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for this classic pickup. Still running strong after nearly 5 decades." The crowd roared. Karen's face turned the same shade as her expensive lipstick. She tried clapping weakly, but the smirk she usually wore was nowhere to be found. By the time the parade ended, I had shaken more hands than I could count, and several folks even asked if I'd be willing to show the truck at future community events. The same vehicle Karen had ridiculed was now a local treasure. Driving home that afternoon, I glanced at the truck's worn dashboard and smiled. My dad's old pickup wasn't just metal and bolts. It was respect, heritage, and resilience. And while Karen's SUV might shine in the driveway, it would never earn the admiration that this so-called junkyard heap had won in a single afternoon. Enjoying this neighborhood drama where an old junk truck turned into the star of the parade? Hit that subscribe button for more surprising stories that flip the script. Give this a like if you loved seeing Karen's reaction, and drop a comment. Would you keep a classic truck like this, or trade it in for something shiny and new?